Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University, and welcome to Curriculum Origins, part of our class TED 369, Curriculum and Methods in Secondary Education. In this video, let's consider curriculum, let's define it, and see how it applies to secondary education. Let's look at knowledge and its components, and then let's conclude by considering two related topics, setting demands and textbooks, which includes content area reading. Let's begin by defining curriculum. What is curriculum all about? Basically, it's the way that we define what we want the students to learn and when we want them to learn this material. If we go back to the origins of the word curriculum, it dates back to a Latin word that means to run. Now, not just to run in a race, but rather to jump over hurdles as they're completing a marathon. So let's think for a moment. What should be included in curriculum? When someone graduates from high school, regardless where they are geographically when they graduate high school, what should they know? Should Algebra 2 be included in that list? Should the Canterbury Tales or some other specific literary work? Should the cell structure of plants? Should they be able to name the 50 states and their capitals? Should they have studied physics? When we start to look at it this way and get that 30,000-foot view, you start to think, well, boy, this is more complex than what I originally thought. What should be included in and why? And even more importantly, maybe, who should determine the curriculum? Does the United States have a national curriculum? No, we don't. The Constitution in this country distributes that power to each of the state governments. And then the state governments further distribute certain capabilities and leeway and power to local school districts. But if you think about it, we kind of have a de facto, in other words, by default, national curriculum, because we have federal funding regulations that guide the process. We have professional organizations. We have textbook authors and publishers. So think about it. Even though there's not a requirement in terms of curriculum, but if many schools are using the same textbooks, and if textbooks from different companies are similar, then we're kind of all following the same pattern, basically. And of course, we also have standards. We're going to look more at standards in Mod 4 in this course. One means of attempting to standardize curriculum in K through 12 across 50 states in this country is the Carnegie Unit. It was created in 1906 by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. And this is a universal measure of courses. We find that one Carnegie unit is equal to 120 hours in one subject area. And our federal government states that students should have 14 of these Carnegie units by the time they graduate in grade 12. And that would also be considered not just for graduation, but also would be considered minimum amount of preparation to enter college. While the federal government requires 14 Carnegie units, it also gives power to the states to decide which are the required courses and which electives can make up those 14 Carnegie units. And states can decide when are these courses offered and in which order or sequence. Further, the states have the right to grant to the local school districts some power and some flexibility in terms of the curriculum, when the course is offered and which courses are required, and the sequence as well. When we talk about curriculum, when we're talking about what will be taught to the students, we're really focusing on the instruction and the instructional process. But really, There's another focus we need as well, and that is learning targets. In other words, let's focus on assessment. Let's look at the competencies. What are the students expected to be able to do? What are they expected to be able to achieve and accomplish after they encounter the curriculum? When we're considering knowledge, like what are teachers trying to impart to students, realize that it consists of a whole lot more than facts and concepts. Because the essence of an education is a whole lot more. It includes the reflective, the analytical, and also even the disposition of people in different domains. So let's take a better look at knowledge. The curriculum, as taught by teachers, it expects that students will acquire knowledge. So, how do we define knowledge? Well, it's the accepted truth. And in our modern day, given technological capabilities and advances, we have to maybe refine it even further and say knowledge is the best truth that we know right now, realizing that as new discoveries and new insights come about, that this will change. Now, it's always been flexible to change, but given new technologies, it's changing at a whole lot more rapid pace today. Further, we can break down knowledge into three different areas. We can start off at the broad level and say we can break knowledge into domains in high school, like social studies and science. Now, those are very broad fields. But then we can break those down further into disciplines. So there's subcategories like history and geography. And even more so, we can refine it down into specific courses like American history or world history. To present a workable definition of knowledge, Duplass suggests that there are 5 areas that knowledge consists of, and that's what we as teachers look to impart to students. First is basic skills knowledge. So these are prerequisite skills. Then there's information knowledge, and that's the theories, the facts, and the concepts in our particular content area. In each content area, there's procedural knowledge. That's the practical application. What do you do to accomplish items in that content area? And then we have ideas and beliefs. Now, these we do not directly teach, of course, but this results from the students processing instruction. They develop their own ideas and understandings. They construct these ideas and these beliefs as they experience our curriculum. To dig just a little deeper into these, the basic skills are the foundation on which everything else rests. So we're talking about math, reading, writing, and speaking. The second part of knowledge is the information knowledge. And to dig a little deeper, that consists of facts, and those are the specific items in that content area. Concepts, so concepts are the words we describe how various elements group together, and generalizations, which are the relationships between and among facts and concepts. Now, the word generalizations sometimes has different terms. For example, in music, they're referred to as principles. In physics, they're laws. In history, they are our conclusions. In math, it's theorems. One of the most important things that teachers impart to students is procedural knowledge, the third part of knowledge as described by Duplass. Procedural knowledge is knowing how, in other words, knowing what to do, how to do things, versus just understanding the concepts, which is information knowledge. So if we're looking at the information knowledge in terms of mathematics, we could say, well, I understand the terms and I understand the principles. Okay, that's good, but now we have to go a step further and do procedural knowledge. We have to do geometry. So when we look at the types of knowledge that we impart in middle and high school, the procedural knowledge is really our primary goal here. When teachers refer to thinking skills or critical thinking, that's procedural knowledge that's now used across disciplines. And we find the process of procedural knowledge described in Bloom's revised taxonomy, where students start by remembering something and then they understand and apply it. After they apply, they can analyze it, evaluate it, and then ultimately even create. Since procedural knowledge involves the doing of a particular content area, procedural knowledge includes deciding on the nature of a problem that a student will encounter in that content area, to create a mental image of that problem, and then ultimately to develop a strategy to use basic skills and executive processes in order to deal with and try to satisfy that problem. Think back to your high school experience. What do you think made up the majority of your education? Was it procedural or was it information knowledge? When you look at it, as we teach, we should be focusing on procedural knowledge because that's taking information knowledge and putting it into practice. And another official term is big ideas. That should also be the focus of our teaching because what we're looking to do is help students think across disciplines, show them how to apply information and procedural knowledge to solve problems and issues. Before procedural knowledge was emphasized, most teachers were just happy if students were just learning the facts, just the information knowledge. But today we know we can go even beyond that and apply it. The last two elements of knowledge, as we described, are ideas and beliefs. So this is our ultimate goal after we teach the basic skills, the information knowledge, and the procedural knowledge. We want students to ultimately come out with formulating ideas. So the idea is the result of them processing the information and procedural knowledge. And further, students, we want them to come out with beliefs. So this is what they accept, what they understand, what they value, what they believe to be correct. And that becomes part of them. And this is how education can be transformative, because based on everything that we teach, all of the curriculum that they're exposed to, the students ultimately form ideas and then beliefs. Here, one more time, is a review of all the elements of knowledge that we expect our students to acquire. The basic skills, the information knowledge, procedural knowledge, and then ultimately form ideas and beliefs. To round out our understanding of curriculum and knowledge, which is what we expect students to gain from their experience with the curriculum, let's look at several other quick concepts. First, we already mentioned, is the big idea. Big ideas are those powerful, long-lasting concepts or generalizations that the teacher expects the students will acquire. And that involves them examining their existing beliefs and expects them to embrace some new ideas. So out of a course that you teach, there will be several big, powerful ideas that you want students to take away from those courses. Ideally, teachers will organize their courses around these big ideas because they are the focus. And then teachers will use information knowledge and procedural knowledge and also enhance that with academic disposition. And we'll say something about that in a moment. This will also require special skills on the part of the teacher, depending on the content that you're teaching, whatever your domain is. It requires a teacher to have pedagogical content knowledge. In other words, in addition to in general knowing how to teach, which is just pedagogy in general, how do you teach that particular content area? What is unique there, and how can we uniquely approach it? And finally, knowledge also consists of students understanding and starting to acquire some of the academic disposition of that particular domain. So in other words, if you're a history teacher, you approach things in a unique way, as history teachers do. If you're a math teacher, then you're going to approach the world from a more mathematical mindset, or a scientific mindset, or a musical, artistic mindset. Whatever your domain is, everyone in that domain has a certain way that we approach the world and problems that we encounter in the world. So, technically speaking, dispositions are composed of your abilities, your sensitivities, and also your inclinations. In other words, the tendency to behave in certain ways and to view the world through a specific lens. This sums up what curriculum is all about. It's about knowledge. Let's round out the video today by considering two related concepts, and those are setting demands and also textbooks. Most school districts will employ the use of textbooks, whether they're physical books, hard copy, or if they're e-books, or a little bit of both. School districts normally adopt new textbooks every several years, so there are some pros and there's some cons to using textbooks. Realize that the textbook should not be the be-all and end-all. It should not be the main focus of our instruction, but rather, if it's a tool as part of an instructional package, textbooks can be invaluable. Some benefits of using textbooks. Well, it can certainly provide a good organization of content and serve as a skeleton or an outline for what we're going to teach in our content area. It can also serve as a good basis for deciding how to emphasize different pieces. What should be most important? We can gather that from textbooks. They can also provide a lot of good additional materials, like additional resources, additional readings. Many times in today's world, the technological world, they can provide online sources, videos, and many other good sources. They can also present tested activities and with suggestions for how the teacher should use them. Further, many of us have experienced a teacher who kind of skipped around a textbook. So that's a good indication that that teacher is using the textbook as one tool, one resource, but is also organizing the course rather than letting the textbook be the organizer for that particular course. I think all of us have experienced at least one teacher who did the opposite, which is relying on one single textbook and basically starting from page one and going straight through. Not that that's always bad, but in many cases that teacher may miss the use of other valuable resources. And also that textbook may not adequately address issues of interest or importance to that particular community. Because remember that textbooks are national, even if they're following standards, which all of them are today, but still remember the organization of education within our country. The federal government sets some standards, passes it down to the states and gives flexibility there, and the states give flexibility to local school districts. So maybe that textbook won't address everything that community needs. Also, the level of reading in one textbook may not be appropriate for all the learners. Let's finish by looking at another related topic, and that is setting demands. Setting demands are related to curriculum in that the classroom teacher will have a specific set of skills in order for the class to be successful in that particular course. So for example, some teachers may ask students and require students to take notes or to do outlining of a textbook, read and summarize, write a paper. What are the setting demands that you're going to require for your classes? And another question arises, should we teach those setting demands? As you organize your thoughts around this concept, think back to your experiences in high school. What are some examples of setting demands that you have experienced? Again, should we teach these to our students? Well, the answer to that is, well, maybe yes and maybe no. If you're at the middle level or at the lower grades in high school, maybe they're new to the student, so maybe taking some time to actually instruct in them is a good idea. As you're moving up and through the high school and teaching students who are older, chances are they've experienced some of these setting demands, and then you will not have to take the time to teach them to students. One setting demand in many content areas is content area reading, and let's look at that for a moment. Content area reading refers to the type of reading that a student will encounter in a particular subject area, and usually anything outside of English literature. In literature, all students will grow up through our school system learning how to read a novel, and they'll learn about poetry and so on. But when we look at science, when we look at math, when we look at philosophy, many times it's not a novel type of writing, but rather there are other structures in the text. There are sidebars, there could be footnotes. When we look at the reading in these subject domains, maybe we do have to help the students and guide them and maybe teach a little bit about how to do the content area reading successfully. Most likely your students will come in understanding the novel with distinct chapters. Each page of the book will look pretty much the same, and it'll feature sentences, paragraphs, and maybe some illustrations, but maybe not all that many. But consider a content area textbook. There are chapters, text, and paragraphs, but they also use sidebars. They use illustrations. There could be headings. There could be footer information. Certain text could be colored or bold-faced or made to stand out in some way, especially for our younger students. If the student only focuses on the parts of the textbook that look like a novel, they may miss some really critical information on the page of that textbook. By the time the students get to you in high school, they'll understand the novel, literature that's written in narrative form. There's a plot there, there's characters and dialogue, and all of this conveys the message of the novel to the reader. And it can be just a good read, sit down and then kick back and enjoy reading. Now, in content area textbooks, it's a whole different story. These are written to inform, sometimes to persuade, certainly to describe and explain information for the reader. There's no story necessarily. There's no characters. There's definitely no dialogue. And again, sidebar and other elements that could be on the page. The student reader needs to really use strategies to harness and synthesize this information to glean what they need to know. There might be so much information on that page. They may need help with some strategies to prioritize and see what's most important. Like, what do they have to look at? What do they have to know? In some textbooks, there's little extras, like here's like in a science textbook, there might be something, sidebar saying, well, here's the background on a person who developed a particular theory or some piece of equipment or something like that. Is that something they need to know? Is that like a little extra to keep them interested? Again, sometimes the readers in content area textbooks need a little help to prioritize and to glean what they need to out of that text. And then, content area textbooks use some things that are not used in a novel at all. For example, they may use certain particular text structures or types of writing, like lab reports, for example, statistical information being presented on the page. So the student cannot draw from the novel at all to help them in understanding these structures. So ultimately, should teachers teach content area reading strategies as one of their setting demands? Well, the answer is maybe. It depends on the age and maturity and the experience of the students, and also how complicated your content area textbook is. In review, in this video we considered curriculum, where it came from, what it means. Uh, we looked at background like national curriculum, Carnegie Unit. We looked at knowledge that consists of 5 different elements. And 2 related topics, we looked at textbooks and setting demands, and specifically content area reading. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in class. To wrap up this video and this class session, you're now ready to complete Project 2.2 about setting demands. If you navigate in Blackboard to the Modules folder, under Module 2, you'll find this assignment. And in this assignment, I'm going to ask you to determine and describe the setting demands that you feel will be required for student academic success in your classroom. Are you going to teach those or not? And finally, is teaching content area reading a setting demand for your area?